Welcome to AminAcademy.com. In History of Muslim World, let us discuss about history of Prophet Muhammad in Medina continuation. The War of Trench. The trench the Muslims dug was the first of its kind in Arab warfare. In the fifth year of the Hijrah, the idolaters made a great effort to destroy Islam in the War of the Clans or War of the Trench, as it is variously called when Quraysh, with all their clans and the great desert tribe Ghatafan, with all their clans an army of 10,000 men rode against Al-Madinah. The Prophet, by the advice of Salman al-Farsi, he said, caused a deep trench to be dug before the city and himself led the work of digging it. The army of the clans was stopped by the trench, a novelty in Arab warfare. It seemed impassable for cavalry, which formed their strength. They camped in sight of it and daily showered their arrows on its defenders. While the Muslims were awaiting the assault, news came that Bani Quraysh, a Jewish tribe of Yathrib which had till then been loyal and gone over to the enemy. The case seemed desperate, but the delay caused by the trench had damped the ardor of the clans, and one who has secretly a Muslim managed to show distrust between Quraysh and their Jewish allies, so that both hesitated to act. Then came a bitter wind from the sea, which blew for 3 days and nights so terribly that not a tent could be kept standing, not a fire lighted, not a pot boiled. The tribesmen were in utter misery. At length, one night, the leader of Quraysh decided that the torment could be borne no longer and gave the order to retire. When Ghatafan awoke next morning, they found Quraysh had gone and they too took up their baggage and retreated. Punishment of Bani Qurayza. On the day of the return from the trench, the Prophet ordered war on the trencherers. Bani Quraysh, who conscious of their guilt, had already taken to their towers of refuge. After a siege of nearly a month, they had to surrender unconditionally. They only begged that they might be judged by a member of the Arab tribe of which they were adherents. The Prophet granted their request, but the judge upon whose favor they had counted condemned their fighting men to death, their women and children to slavery. Early in the sixth year of Hijrah, the Prophet led a campaign against the Bani al-Mustaliq, a tribe who were preparing to attack Muslims. Al-Hudaybiyah, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah at 628 CE. In the same year, the Prophet had a vision in which he found himself entering the holy place at Mecca unopposed. Therefore, he determined to attempt a pilgrimage. Besides a number of Muslims from Yathrib, which we shall henceforth call Al-Madinah, he called upon the friendly Arabs whose numbers had increased since the miraculous, as it was considered, discomfiture of the clans to accompany him, but most of them did not respond. Attired as pilgrims and taking with them the customary offering, a company of 1,400 men journeyed to Mecca. As they drew Near the Holy Valley, they were met by a friend from the city who warned the prophet that Quraysh had put on their leopard skins, the badge of valor, and had sworn to prevent his entering the sanctuary. The cavalry was on the road before him. On that, the prophet ordered a detour through mountain gorges, and the Muslims were tired out when they came down at last into the valley of Mecca and encamped at a spot called Al-Hudaybiyah. From thence, from thence he tried to open negotiations with Quraysh to explain he came only as pilgrims. Never, never have I seen a man honored as Muhammad is honored by his comrades. The first messenger he sent towards the city was maltreated and his camel hamstrung. He returned without delivering his message. Quraysh on their side sent an envoy which was threatening in tone and very arrogant. Another of their envoys was too familiar and had to be reminded sternly of the respect due to Prophet. It was he who, on his return of the city, said, I have seen Caesar and Chosroes in their pomp, but never I have seen a man honored as Muhammad is honored by his comrades. The Prophet sought some messengers who would impose respect. Uthman was finally chosen because of his kinship with the powerful Umayyad family. While the Muslims were awaiting his return, the news came that he had been murdered. It was then the Prophet sitting under a tree in Al-Hudaybiyah took an oath from all his comrades that they would stand for all together. After a while, however, it became known that Uthman had not been murdered. A troop which came out from the city to molest the Muslims in their camp was captured before they could do any hurt and brought before the Prophet, who forgave them on their promise to renounce hostility. Truce of Truce al-Hudaybiyah. The surah entitled Victory or An-Nasr was revealed during the return journey from Al-Hudaybiyah. Then proper envoys came then from Quraysh. After some negotiation, the truce of Al-Hudaybiyah was signed. For 10 years, there were to be no hostilities between the parties. The Prophet was to return to Al-Madinah without visiting the Kaaba. But in the following year, he might perform the pilgrimage with his comrades. Quraysh promising to evacuate Mecca for the 3 days to allow of his doing so. Deserts from Quraysh to the Muslims during the period of the truce were to be returned. Not so deserts from the Muslims to Quraysh. Any tribes or clan who wished to share in a treaty was allies of the Prophet might do so, and any tribes or clan who wished to share in the treaty as allies of Quraysh might do so. There was dismay among the Muslims at these terms. They asked one another, where is the victory that we were promised? It was during the return journey from Al-Hudaybiyah that the surah entitled Victory was revealed. This truce proved, in fact, to be a greatest victory that the Muslims had till then achieved. War had been a barrier between them and the idolaters, but now both parties met and talked together. and the new religion spread more rapidly. In the 2 years which elapsed between the signing of truce and the fall of Mecca, the number of converts was greater than the total number of all previous converts. The Prophet traveled to Al-Hudaybiyah with 1,400 men. 2 years later, when Mecca broke the truce, he marched against them with an army of 10,000. Campaign of Khaybar. One of the forts of Khyber, which is over 100 kilometers outside Medina, is the seventh year of the Hijrah. The Prophet led a campaign against Khyber, the stronghold of the Jewish tribes in North Arabia, which had become a hornet's nest of his enemies. The forts of Khyber were reduced one by one, and the Jews of Khyber became the then forts. Tenets of the Muslims until the expulsion of Jews from the Arabia and the Caliphate of Umar. On the day when the last fort surrendered, Jafar, son of Abu Talib, the Prophet's first cousin, arrived with all who remained of the Muslims who had fled to Abyssinia to escape from persecution in the early days. They had been absent from Arabia 15 years. It was at Khyber that Jews prepared for the Prophet's poisoned meat, of which he only tasted a morsel without swallowing it, and then warned his comrades that it was poisoned. One Muslim who had already swallowed a mouthful died immediately, and the Prophet himself, from the mere taste of it, derived the illness which eventually caused his death. The woman who had cooked the meat was brought before him. When she said that she had done it on account of the humiliation of her people, he forgave her. The Prophet forgave her. Pilgrimage to Mecca. In the same year, the Prophet's vision was fulfilled. He visited the holy place at Mecca unopposed. In accordance with the terms of the truce, their idolaters evacuated the city and from the surrounding heights watched the procedure of the Muslims. At the end of the stipulated 3 days, the chiefs of Quraysh sent to remind the Prophet that the time was up. He then withdrew and the idolaters reoccupied the city. Muadda expedition. In the 8th year of the Hijrah, hearing that the Byzantine emperor was gathering a force in Syria for the destruction of Islam, the Prophet sent 3,000 men to Syria under the command of his freedman Zoid. The campaign was unsuccessful except that it impressed the Syrians with their notion of the reckless valor of the Muslims. The 3,000 did not hesitate to join battle with their 100,000s. When all three leaders appointed by the Prophet had been killed, the survivors obeyed Khalid bin al-Walid, who, by his strategy and courage, managed to pursue a remnant and returned with them to Al-Madinah. Truce broken by Quraysh. In the same year, Quraysh broke the truce by attacking a tribe that was in alliance with the Prophet and massacring them even in the sanctuary at Mecca. Afterwards, they were afraid because of what they had done. They sent Abu Sufyan to Al-Madinah to ask for the existing treaty to be renewed, and it's then prolonged. They hoped that he would arrive before the tiding of the massacre, but messenger from the injured tribe had been before him, and his embassy was fruitless. Conquest of Mecca, that is the day of mercy. When the Prophet summoned all the Muslims capable of bearing arms and marched to Mecca, Quraysh were overawed. Their cavalry put up a show of defense before the town, but were routed without bloodshed, and the Prophet entered his native city as conqueror. The inhabitants expected vengeance from their past misdeeds. The Prophet proclaimed general amnesty. Only a few known criminals were proscribed, and most of those were in the end forgiven. In their relief and surprise, the whole population of Mecca hastened to swear allegiance. The Prophet caused all the idols which were in the sanctuary to be destroyed, saying, "Truth hath come, darkness hath vanished away," and the Muslims' call to pray was heard in Mecca. Battle of Hunain. In the same year, there was an angry gathering of pagan tribes eager to regain the Kaaba. The Prophet led 12,000 men against them at Hunain. In a deep ravine, his troops were ambushed by the enemy and almost put to flight. It was the difficulty that they were railed to the Prophet and his bodyguard of faithful comrades who alone stood with him. But the victory, when it came, was complete and booty enormous, for many of the hostile tribes had brought out with them everything that they possessed. Conquest of Taif. The declaration of immunity marks the end of idol worship in Arabia. The tribe of Thaqif was among the enemy at Hunain. After the victory, their city of Taif was besieged by the Muslims and finally reduced. Then the Prophet appointed a governor of Mecca and himself returned to Al-Madinah to the boundless joy of the Ansar, who had feared lest, now that he had regained his native city, he might forsake them and make Mecca the capital. The Tabuk expedition. In the ninth year of the Hijrah, hearing that an army was again being mustered in Syria, the Prophet called on all the Muslims to support him in a great campaign. The far distance, the hot season, the fact that it was harvest time and the prestige of the enemy caused many to excuse themselves and many more to stay behind without excuse. Those defaulters are denounced in the Quran. But the campaign ended peacefully. The army advanced to Tabuk on the confines of Syria and there learnt that enemy had not yet gathered. Declaration of immunity. Although Mecca had been conquered and its people were now Muslims, the official order of the pilgrimage had not been changed. The pagan Arabs performing it in their manner and the Muslims in their manner. It was only after the pilgrimage caravan had left Al-Madinah in the ninth year of the Hijrah, when Islam was dominant in the North Arabia, that a declaration of immunity, as it is called, was revealed. The Prophet sent a copy of it by messenger to Abu Bakr leader of the pilgrimage with the instruction that Ali was to read it to the multitudes at Mecca. Its its purport was that after that its purpose was that after that year Muslims only were to make the pilgrimages, exception being made for such to the idolaters as had a treaty with the Muslims and had never broken their treaty nor supported anyone against them. Such were to enjoy the privilege of their treaty for the term thereof, but when their treaty expired, they would be as other idolaters. That proclamation marks the end of idol worship in Arabia. The year of deputations. The ninth year of Hijrah is called the year of deputation because from all parts of Arabia, deputation came to Al-Madinah to swear allegiance to the Prophet and to hear the Quran. The Prophet had become, in fact, Emperor of Arabia, but his way of life remained as simple as before. The number of the campaign which he led in person during the last 10 years of his life is 27, in 9 of which there was hard fighting. The number of the expedition, that is, the number of the campaign which he led in person during the last 10 years of his life is 27, in 9 of which there was hard fighting. The number of the expedition which he planned and sent out under other leaders is 38. They personally controlled every detail of the organization, judged every case, and was accessible to every suppliant. In those 10 years, the destroyed idolatry in Arabia, raised women from the status of a cattle to legal equity with men, effectively stopped the drunkenness and immorality which had till then disgraced the Arabs. Men in love with faith. Sincerely, the honest dealing transferred tribes who had been for centuries content with ignorance into a people with the greatest thirst for knowledge, and for the first time in history made universal human brotherhood in fact the principle of common law, and his support and guide in all that work was the Quran. Now, farewell pilgrimage. In the 10th year of the Hijrah, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, went to Mecca as a pilgrim for the last time. His pilgrimage of farewell, it is called, when from Mount Arafat he preached to an enormous throng of pilgrims. He reminded them of all the duties Islam enjoined upon them, and that they would one day have to meet their Lord, who would judge each one of them according to his work. At the end of the discourse, he asked, "Have I not conveyed the message?" And from that great multitude of men who a few months or years before had all been conscienceless idolaters, the shout went up, "O Allah!" Yes, the Prophet said, "O Allah, be thou witness." Illness and death of the Prophet. It was during that last pilgrimage that the surah entitled Saksar was revealed, which he received as an announcement of approaching death. Soon after his return to Al-Madinah, he fell ill. The tidings of his illness caused dismay throughout Arabia. and anguish to the folk of Al-Madinah, Mecca, and Taif, the hometowns. At early dawn, on the last day of his earthly life, he came out from his room beside the mosque at Al-Madinah and joined the public prayer, which Abu Bakr had been leading since his illness, and there was great relief among the people who supposed him well again. For him who worshipped Muhammad, Muhammad is dead. But as for his who worship Allah, Allah is alive and dieth not. When later in the day the rumor grew that he was dead, Omar threatened those who spread the rumor with dire punishment, declaring it a crime to think that the messenger of God could die. He was storming at the people in that strain when Abu Bakr came into the mosque and overheard him. Abu Bakr went to the chamber of his daughter Aisha, where the Prophet lay. Having ascertained the fact and kissed the dead man's forehead, he went back into the mosque. The people were still listening to Umar, who was saying that the rumor was a wicked lie, that the Prophet, who was all in all to them, could not be dead. Abu Bakr went up to Umar and tried to stop him by whispered word. Then, finding he could pay no heed, Abu Bakr called to the people, who, recognizing his voice, left Umar and came crowding round him. He first gave praise to Allah and then said, O people, lo, as for his who worshipped Muhammad, Muhammad is dead. But as for him who worshipped Allah, Allah is alive and dieth not. The, then recited the verse of the Quran. And Muhammad is but a messenger, messengers the like of whom have passed away before him. Will it be that when the death or is slain, ye will turn back on your heels? Who was turned back doth no hurt to Allah, the Allah will reward the thankful. Quran has been very carefully preserved, and says the narrator, an eyewitness, it was as if the people had not known that such a verse had been revealed till Abu Bakr recited it. And another witness tells how Umar used to say, directly I heard Abu Bakr recite that verse, my feet were cut from beneath me and I fell to the ground. For I knew that Allah's messenger was dead. May Allah keep him. Bless and keep him. All the surahs of the Quran had been recorded in writing before the Prophet's death, and many Muslims had committed the whole Quran to memory, but the written surahs were dispersed among the people, and when in a battle which took place during the Caliphate of Abu Bakr, that is to say, within 2 years of the Prophet's death, a large number of those who knew the whole Quran by heart were killed by enemies. A collection of the whole Quran was made and put in writing in the Caliphate of Uthman. All existing copies of surahs were called in, and an authoritative version based on Abu Bakr's collections and the testimony of those who had the whole Quran by heart was compiled exactly in the present form and the order, which is regarded as traditional and as the arrangement of the Prophet himself, the Caliph Uthman and his helper being comrades of the Prophet and the most devout students of the revelation. The Quran has thus been very carefully preserved. courtesy islamonline.net. So far we discussed about complete history of Muhammad in short form. We have done. Please subscribe our YouTube channel.